you enjoy this show.
Outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.
Hello there, everybody. Good evening, and good evening to all of you who are listening live, and welcome to all those who are listening back to the podcast. I am live here today with Jamie O Dowd, author of the A-Z of Student Wellbeing. We are going to be talking about student well-being today, but first of all, Jamie is here as a John Catt author. This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching. Great teaching is what we're all interested in. Student well-being, interest in student well-being is all part of great teaching. So level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles and use the code, you see it here on the screen, use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. So, Jamie, welcome to the show. Is this your first TTR show?
It is indeed, and thank you very much for having me. I'm looking forward to speaking to you about all matters related to student wellbeing.
Well, we are very excited. I'm very excited to talk to you about this. As I was saying to you earlier, you know, I grew up in a culture where student well-being seemed to be, you know, inherent in the teaching culture. But before we look into the ideas that you've shared in your book, tell us about yourself. I know that you're in Bahrain and you're assistant head of the senior school, but maybe give us a little bit more.
Yeah, okay. So I came to teaching late, actually. I didn't start teaching till I was sort of 27. So I've been in teaching around 20 years and did a variety of interesting and weird and wonderful things before then. I was an actor, managed and ran a nightclub with my brothers, worked at florist wholesalers. And I only mention those things because I think that there's a richness that the life experiences bring you in this job. Moved out to Bahrain 14 years ago with my wife and my two children who were listening in a room not far from here. And they were just babies when we came, 9 months and 3. And now I'm getting ready to say goodbye to one of them as she starts university back in the UK. And my son starts his GCSEs. So we've been in Bahrain 14 years. We absolutely love it here. We love the school that I work at, the community, the expat community. And very proud to have had 20 successful years in teaching, and the majority of that being pastoral leadership.
That's exciting. And talking about, you know, about you getting into teaching and getting in late, like you say, you know, that richness, right? That richness of experience, that varied experience. I'd like to go into another aspect of richness of your experience, and that's your master's. You did a master's in educational leadership or educational management?
Yeah,
right? Educational leadership and management. Look at that. Yeah. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I'd only just recently completed an MPQH. I'd done that in sort of through COVID, and that was such a fantastic course, and I pursued a wellbeing strand to my project there. But I felt like I really wanted to dig deeper into what it meant in a modern educational context to be a leader of wellbeing when my experiences as a child, as a kid growing up in the 80s and 90s, that well-being was very much sort of secondary to your academic progress. And indeed, when I even started researching when did we start having pastoral systems in schools, it surprised me to find that it was only really the 70s that there was ever really a notion of who within that school journey, within that context, would oversee a child's pastoral care. And I think coupled with that was the fact that my family fostered children for the majority of my lifetime. So I was always around children who had those, well, I say pastoral issues, that's sort of putting it lightly, putting it politely for the tone of the conversation. They were damaged children. So being around
pastoral needs, we could say. Pastoral needs. Sorry to interrupt. That was really rude.
You're absolutely right. And going through school, and even though I had a fantastic childhood myself and a great schooling, just looking back as an adult and looking at where there were missed opportunities to support me when I had certain needs, whether that was just natural growing up or when I started, perhaps my behavior needed bringing back into line, as any 14, 15-year-old boy sometimes finds, that there was an absence of that. And there was just an automatic blame on the child, whether that was myself or these foster kids that we had in and out of the house. There was always a get-out clause in education that the kids are naughty. And, we've done what we can and grades are suffering, but we've got to protect the school. So the reason I went into the master's course was to say, okay, well, that was then. And I can't, we can't linger in what the past was. But I know that there's so many good wellbeing programs out there. And coming out of COVID, schools certainly scrambled to try and make sure that their pastoral wellbeing, mental health provision was top notch. Yet so many of these programs in schools I went to around the Middle East in particular just failed to stick. And I use that phrase deliberately because there's one very famous article about positive education. Why won't it stick? And Martin Seligman, if you read his books about PERMA, positive psychology and positive education, you read that and go, well, there's a golden bullet there. That's absolutely going to fix everything. But it doesn't. So why won't it stick? So I was fascinated in my eagerness and my passion to make the lives of young people better, to understand why something won't work so we can get it to work.
Mm-hmm. Could I just ask you, and you may or may not have an answer to this, but why do you think we needed COVID to make us, suddenly might not be the appropriate word and embarrassing for an English teacher not to have it, but why did we need COVID, something like COVID, to happen to suddenly have this awareness of pastoral care, student well-being, each other's well-being? Because there's, I think, also since COVID, I've become more aware of the narrative, the discourse around teacher well-being and student well-being. Why did we need something like that to happen in the global north, at least?
Yeah, I think perhaps because of the disruption. It's like that concept, but when somebody tells you that you're breathing and you think about your breathing, and then all of a sudden you have to start doing it manually, and you forget that, I took that for granted before somebody reminded me to breathe. Now I'm conscious of it. I think that's what COVID did. I think I wouldn't say we had things perfectly before COVID, but we had the basics that we didn't speak about. And I think maybe later you're going to ask me a question about Jenga, so I'll be careful how much I answer.
Okay.
But we had those basic layers in place where staff well-being, student well-being, relationships were so sort of entrenched in everything that we did, and they were so normal. That was the breathing without thinking about it. Then COVID came along and disrupted that. And we realized, like now I'm sat behind this screen with you, and it's the first time you and I have met, and a relationship won't be the same until I meet you at a conference or around the world, and we go, oh, actually, we've got something more in connection than we realized on screen. What we lost through COVID made us come back, and schools almost panicked a little bit, because depending on where you were in the world, and Bahrain handled the lockdown fantastically well. I'm biased, but I think the schools in the Middle East generally handled the lockdown very well. But in global terms, schools came back and were so worried about the well-being and mental health of their children and young people that we scrambled to get ahead of the game, particularly when we saw, and I did some analysis of school websites before COVID and after, and 90% of them had changed. So their front page, their landing page, reflected something about well-being or mental health that previously didn't exist. Because what parents saw when they were this side of the camera, like I was, trying to teach my children and children online, non-teaching parents realized this is really hard. This is difficult to manage these people that you have, these young people that you have, that aren't yours, they're not your blood relations, they're not your skin and bone, and we send them to you every day. And perhaps there was an element of taking it for granted that we're spinning so many plates as teachers. And what COVID made everyone realize, and I think particularly parents, was, wow, there's actually a lot going on. The minute we send our kids to school, what goes on behind that door is now so important that the spotlight has been shone on teachers. I think parents are now so aware of anything that can affect their kids in terms of their mental health and well-being, that they're shifting that. I wouldn't say anxiety, because that's unfair on parents, but they're shifting that focus to the schools, and they're asking schools the question, what is it you're doing? Yeah, I've seen your grades, you've got a big banner outside your school, you've got it on the website, that's fine, that's a number. But what are you doing to make sure my child's well? And schools are trying to stay ahead of that by going, yes, we need to be very explicit. It's not just enough to say, this is a safe school, we don't tolerate bullying, all the things that all schools do. You now need the hard evidence. You need the name of the program. You need an enrichment roadmap. You need these things. So COVID was a game changer.
Okay. It's really, really interesting what you've described, because as I was saying to you before the show, I grew up in Southeast Asia. I went to school in Singapore. I went to a regular run-of-the-mill state school, so not a private school, not a British medium school or German-based school, but local government school, and all schools had a pastoral care. I think my generation was the first. I remember when I went to secondary school, so you had 6 years of primary school, and then you go into secondary school. So how old was I? I don't know, 12. Yeah. I went to secondary school when I was 12, and we were the first batch who we were given mentors, and there was this 1 hour a week of pastoral care. And I was in an all-girls school, and we thought it was hilarious. We were all giggling, and nobody had, I don't know if the teachers had an idea, but as kids, we had no idea what were we supposed to do in this, 1 hour a week with the teacher. But, and then, as time went on, I finished school and, had lots of pastoral care sessions, knew that my school had, counselors, school counselors, so not the kind of career counseling, but really, people who were trained. And then I went into adult life, and I worked, I helped out at a secondary school. I made one of the teachers became a friend, and she was then doing training to become a counselor, and she's been working in that secondary school as a counselor. And like I said, I think maybe it is something that is more dominant in Asia because of that concept of care, the school as a village, the family, the family as a village, the community as the village. But that aside, let's talk about your book. Now, did your book come out as a result of the work and the research you did for your master's?
Yeah, I definitely think I would have been in a less advantageous position to write it had I not done the master's. There was, I suppose, a certain degree of luck to how the book came around, which is that Roy Blatchford, the series editor, does work closely with our school. And I think even before his first book in the series came out, him and I would often speak when he came to visit Bahrain about all aspects of teaching and learning. When you just get that person who is so knowledgeable, I still think that I'm relatively early in my career, even though I'm getting on a bit. I'm 47 and I've been teaching 20 years. I look at people like Roy and really want to sort of take what I can from their knowledge. Now, when he did share his first book with us, and in true Roy style, said, right, give me some feedback about this. And he's open with his email. I said, well, Roy, I mean, you've missed a trick. W, no well-being. In fact, there's nothing in the A to Z of well-being. I know at the time, I had no idea that he was extending the series. So he said, okay. And he tested me a little bit. Write me a couple of chapters. I could write 2 A to Zs. So I sent a couple in, and actually, when we then said, yeah, let's go ahead and write the full book, I realized just how much I was drawing from that research, because a master's is intense. The dissertation I actually took an extra year to write it because I wanted to get it right, because it wasn't about getting the qualification. It was about proving and knowing and offering the community something that might be of benefit. If you're putting a wellbeing program in, what are the things that will ultimately lead it to fail? So I don't think I could split the two. I don't think I could have done the book without the master's research as that evidence base.
Okay. And I mean, Roy is wonderful. I interviewed him about one of his other A to Zs, and he's lovely. He comes with so much experience. I just have to share with you, you said, that you feel that you're just at the beginning of your career. Have you ever read, I can't remember off the top of my mind who the author is, but the 7 stages in the life of a teacher? Where
come across that, no.
Okay, I'm gonna have to look that up for you, but you have the 7 stages, not related to student well-being, so we digress here. But the first stage is, when you're it's all about survival. You've just qualified, and you're in survival mode, and then as you go on through these stages, at some point, you come right at the end is just resignation, or where you think, oh, I've done everything. And I think you're there kind of in the middle, one of the middle stages, where you found a passion, you found something that you're really passionate about and want to work on. So you're there. I have to get the article to you. But let's come back to your book. Sure. I know you mentioned when Roy said, give me a couple of chapters, and you said you had enough material for 2 books, so to speak. But nonetheless, what really was the challenge in writing an A to Z book rather than just a book about student well-being?
Yeah, I think for me, the first kind of draft stage, it was waking up in the night with the fear that I'd left out something so essential that anybody with a few days teaching knowledge might read this. And I think I had imposter syndrome, that how could you leave that out? You've written about these other things. I think as well, trying to appreciate global context, as I mentioned, being here for 14 years, I'm in a non-profit school, albeit a private school. It's very easy to become detached from the UK, although of course, having friends and family and reading and researching, as I have done for Masters MPQH, has helped keep me abreast of what's going on in the UK. That was a challenge. But I think for me, what I felt, the A to Z format perhaps would result in me not giving enough detail to chapters that could have been books on their own, and I had to edit down. And it was only when, giving myself a hard time as authors and teachers, we often do. I remember thinking, look, when I go on a course, when I go on a conference, I can spend 2 to 3 days, often traveling, because we're in a very small place in Bahrain. And I might go on a 3-day conference in Dubai. I might come away with one thing. And it might be that one thing that I put in place the next day at school, but it stays with me for 10, 15 years. So I remember reflecting and getting halfway through the book thinking, am I doing well-being justice with these brief chapters? And remembering what the purpose of the book is and what the purpose of the series is. And it is that really accessible way of understanding a range of topics over all of the things that are complex, the leadership, inclusivity,
exercise.
All of these things are important, but the point of the chapters is not to give everybody who reads it a complete comprehensive review of that topic, but just to introduce it, get the minds thinking, and then with the asides, some practical strategies. So I think once I'd reassured myself that was the aim of the book, not to be the expert, because I don't think anybody should be calling themselves a well-being expert, because it's such a fast-paced, such an individual subjective thing, that once I was happy with the format of the book, I think then it made it easier for those chapters to fall in place.
Yeah, and well-being, it's such a complex construct, and I think it's influenced so much by social norms, by context, where you are, who you're talking to, and everything. I have to say I like their sides, but we'll talk about them later. So how did you actually choose the A to Z items? I mean, you were saying like you spent hours wondering, oh no, I put this in, and somebody might come along and say, why didn't you put that in? So when I spoke to Roy with his A to Z, what he'd done was that he had, if I remember rightly, interviewed a bunch of people or had them, listed, and then he'd pick out from that for his A to Z book. How did you choose your A to Z items?
Yeah, so I first started with a Google Doc with the letters down the side, and then just everything that came to my mind with that letter. I just completely exhausted everything that in my previous writings, whether it be masters or MPQH, was relevant. Then what I did was I deleted where there was any sort of overlap. Some things felt like they were encroaching upon each other. But then I did a lot of kind of research. I looked at what other teachers were talking about. So in LinkedIn groups and the Twitter groups that I'm in, I looked at what was common, because I didn't want to make it just about what well-being was for me. My well-being challenges in my school context in this country, as you've just pointed out, are sort of dictated by culture, social economic factors, religion, all manner of things. And what I tried to do was distill them. So whether you were reading this book in America or Singapore or Dubai, there would be relevance. And what I had to do eventually, where I was with some of the letters where I had 4 or 5, I had to adopt sort of a Britain's Got Talent approach by just knocking one out each round until I was left with a finalist. So I was playing them off against each other, thinking in my head, who would win in this battle if they were vying for a place in the final book? And then in my mind, just giving them little summaries, give me a pitch. Why should I have behavior over boys? Because boys have their own well-being challenges, and I wanted to think about something gender specific. So yeah, I played a little bit of a knockout game. It took a while. It wasn't easy. Was it fun though? You have to make it fun. I adopt the same technique when I'm trying to decide which takeaway to order. I line them all up and then knock them out one by one until I'm left with what I want to eat. Oh gosh. Okay. So I love the format of each chapter. And when you were saying, that when you described it, where you didn't want it to be overly complex and something that people could relate to, that was one thing that struck me as well, that as I was reading, the different items in the A to Z, sometimes I did think to myself, oh, I'd like to read more about that. And then I'd start Googling it to see, what other people had said. I especially like the asides. Tell us how you came to that. And one question I had actually about the asides was this based just on, it might be in the introduction, and if I missed it, I'm sorry, but was some of that based on the research that you'd done, or was this observations that you'd made yourselves and just kept notes ready to be used in a book someday? Tell us about the asides. Yeah, I think teachers are magpies, right? And when you're fortunate enough to go to different schools, like my job takes me around different schools. We've organised a wellbeing conference here because, as I mentioned, Bahrain, very small. All of the schools around this area, we find we end up in Dubai, a bit like schools in England might end up in London or Manchester. So we've formed a little bit of a collective, people who do wellbeing, and we've organised teach meets where teachers come along. And I like this idea of being a magpie, whether I'm observing lessons in my own school, whether I'm an inspector as well. So I've done a couple of inspections and been around schools. And I don't think I have a great memory generally as a person, but when I see something that works, and it's amazing that quite often, like I mentioned about conferences, it's often the most simple things that you almost kind of smack yourself in the hand and go, why am I not doing this? Why is everyone not doing this? This is so sort of simple and effective. One thing I tried, because I'm a media studies teacher and I teach that at A level, so older kids, 17, 18. And a couple of years ago, one of my classes, I told them I'd just been on a conference and I don't have a young class. I just want to try this with you. And it's just like a reading. It's like story time. And you're going to hate it. And, just give me feedback at the end. And they said, we have to do this every lesson. I said, I was only trying it out I wasn't actually saying we use it. They went, no, we'll take it in turns. We'll all bring an article in from the news or a website, or we'll bring a TikTok in, and we'll sit in this circle and we'll talk. That's all it was. And I've just seen another teacher use that. So to bring it back to where the asides came from, and I've got to kind of apologize or give ownership to everybody who's ever had me in a classroom to say only a very small percent of that is me. The majority of it is what I've seen and what I've really appreciated in other colleagues, because I don't think we do enough as teachers to share, because we are so busy. We are so bogged down in rightly so, what is the nuts and bolts of our job, being with the students. But when we get that opportunity to go out, it's like going to a market and pick this up, and I don't see that in my country, I'll buy that. And you just go back with this, this rucksack of ideas in your side, or basically 20 years of magpieing and borrowing those ideas from colleagues.
Wow, I love the analogy. I've just written that metaphor, teachers are magpies. I never thought of it like that. I tell my students, I'm going to have to use that, because I work with young people who are going to become teachers, and I tell them that you've got to be like a circus act and have all these tips and tricks and tools in your back pocket. But I think magpies might work better with them. So I loved your A to Z. I mean, because for me personally, I've never put so much thought into student well-being. I am concerned about the well-being of my students, of course, but never really sat down and thought about it. I loved your A to Z items, and I'll tell you later which ones I like. But first of all, with you being the author, tell us your favorites and maybe elaborate on a couple of them.
I think I actually it's been a while since I've read the book, but I've read it so many times in the draft stage, it's almost committed to memory. But I think at the start of G, gratitude, I think I make a disclaimer that I say, this is my personal favorite. I think I'm actually quite new to gratitude as a concept, and that I was exposed to that kind of through PERMA and positive education. And I would openly hold my hands up and say, even as an English teacher, that's my main subject, I misunderstood the concept of gratitude. And the reason I wrote about it was not because I think if I did, everybody does, but it's so much more than the please and the thank yous. I've been very fortunate to have spent time working in South Africa, in a township, and in Thailand, again, in villages. And where I've seen children have the least is where I've seen the most gratitude. The gratitude shown just to be in education. The kids in the Thai villages I've worked at, in the South African villages, who walked 2 hours to get there, are so grateful to be there. And I don't mean that in a patronizing way. It comes across quite sort of, everyone should be grateful to be at school. But the journey, the physical and emotional journey they have to get to school, their well-being, despite them having far less resources than some of the schools I've been around the Middle East, where wealth is greater, it's been the highest, because they find the beauty in what it is they're doing. They find meaning. And even in the young people I work with on a daily basis, where I have to try and reframe their thinking and their brains by using gratitude, even the most stubborn student who, well, I'm not, nothing, everything's bad, life's awful, it's terrible being 14, nothing to be grateful for. When you take school out of that and you take whatever's going off for them and you say, well, what did you do at the weekend? Oh, well, I actually played football and scored 4 goals. All right, well, no, should we be grateful that you're going to get to do that again this Saturday? Well, yeah, but that doesn't count because that's not school. No, it's not what we're saying. And it's about reframing. So that kid who comes in like that, all of a sudden, because you've got them speaking and appreciating that, what, life isn't so bad. Might just have had a terrible lesson, or might have just fallen out with my friends. But when you just reframe, I suppose there's a little bit of manipulation in there. Let's get the thoughts in this direction. Now let's come back to the thing that you're really upset about and approach that now with a bit more of a positive outcome. It's kind of common sense. So that was one of my favorites. I liked the chapter that I wrote. I think it's about knowing. Knowing.
Yes, knowing, knowledge. Yeah.
English teacher, I'm spelling it wrong. The chapter
knowledge.
Not knowledge.
Knowledge.
and thinking about, because I'm interested as an English teacher in the language children use and young people, how it evolves. As I said, I've got an 18 and a 15-year-old, and the word skibbity that was the buzzword of the day only a few weeks ago. Now, if my son's listening to it in his bedroom, he'll be cringing, going, oh, Dad didn't just say that, did he? So I'm interested in, as teachers, we don't need to be native speakers of their tongue. We don't need to know every meme and you know, is Fortnite in, is Roblox in, but just having that knowledge of what it is to be a young kid today. What does it mean to be 13? What do most teachers know what 13-year-olds do after school with their lives? You know, and that's not to impose and say we should know everything, but what I was as a 13-year-old is different to what my son and my daughters were when they were that age. And I think if we lose sight of who our audience is and who we've got in the room, then I think we're doing them a disservice by either talking down to them or pitching things too far for them. So I think we forget as teachers, it's kind of part of our role to have some knowledge of young people generally.
Yeah. And you don't connect with them, I think. And that is one thing that I try to get across to my teacher candidates. The knowledge I didn't call it knowledge, but I said you got to know what your young people are doing, not just what young people are doing now, because you're still in teacher education, but you know, years from now, when you go into the profession, the kids that you're working with, they're going to be a different generation from, you know, the ones who are this age now, and you've got to know, because then, you know, it helps to build rapport. You can show an interest in what's going on in their lives. And kids, they're always tickled, right? If I think my kid said something about something. Sorry, that is so vague, but it was something about something, and I had heard about it somewhere else. And he was so tickled that I'd heard about it. And he was like, oh, you're not as ancient as I thought, which I thought was a bit rude. But you know, but kids, they just get, you know, when they hear an adult share knowledge about their own lives, they're like, oh, wow, you know, it shows that little bit of interest, I think.
Just to go back to the conversation we were having about COVID, when in my role as the pastoral lead, when we did student voice activities about, right, you know, how are you? We're in this weird world now where we're online. The number one thing that students said they missed, and I saw that this was mirrored in other research and surveys that were done, they missed that. That was the thing they missed, because you come into my classroom, the first 10 minutes, you know, I know each kid. So, oh, did you win at football this weekend? And oh, don't tell me you hurt yourself playing tennis again. No, we lost that because we were afraid over this camera. Well, who's there? Mum might be over there. And if we're being silly, and we lost our authentic selves because we're nervous, right? Anything can be taken out of context as a teacher, and that banter that you have might look different in different households. And kids said, we lost that. We lost how's your day? We lost chatting about the film that's just come out. We lost all of that natural stuff that goes on before you can then sort of crack the whip and go, right, come on, we've got to get on with Of Mice and Men today, right? Enough talking about football. And that's life. That's, I mean, you and I did it, and we don't know each other. We had a chit chat 3 or 4 minutes before we got down to business, before this call, and we lost that in COVID. But when students know you care about them, sometimes it is only 2 minutes, 3 minutes investment, and they go, he's cool, he can talk to us, he knows us, he remembers that I had that tennis tournament, and now you know what, I'm going to work for him because he's all right, that guy. So.
Yeah. And you know what, I think no matter what age the students are, when you show that you remember something they've told you, they're just so pleased, because they feel recognized. They feel that, you know, to them, they feel that they're no longer just a number or a name on your register. And my students have said it to me before, and my students, you know, I don't know why we seem to think that student well-being is predominantly for, you know, for those in compulsory schooling. At university, we have that as well. Mental health is an issue, and I see it with my students. And, you know, when I think I said one of my students, her family has chickens, and I had her, I think, a year back, and I met her, and I go, oh, how's your chickens? you know, and she goes, "Oh my God, Miss Kuttig, you still remember my chickens?" And I said, "Yes, I know you had chickens," and things like that. And it's that connection. And actually, when you were talking about banter, I thought to myself, see, B. Did you have B for banter on your list as you were sifting those out? Do you have another one, or can I ask you about the ones that I thought were really interesting? Something underrated?
You know what? I mean, it was a bit of a cheat, really, when I put treble Z for sleep, because what else do you put for Z? I mean, zoos are good for your well-being, so we could have talked about that, but it would have been a bit disingenuous. But I mean, I think sleep. Yeah, I think sleep is, I mean, even for adults, I struggle with sleep. One of my children struggles with sleep. And then through the well-being data, we use a platform called Komodo, which gathers well-being insights and data from thousands of schools, and they publish an annual report. And I don't think this year, but last year, sleep came up as one of the biggest factors, and that crosses cultures, socioeconomic barriers. It crosses everything, because the culture around sleep now with devices, and you know, when I go out, when I've been on holiday with my kids and we share a hotel room, just the ding ding, there's no escape. And when me and my daughter took a little holiday just us two a couple of years ago, and this was happening, it was the next day I said to her, "Why do you keep it on? Why do you not switch it off?" And she said, "What if I miss something? What if something has happened?" And I've only asked her this recently, actually. What if something's happened? What if someone's tagged me and it's a horrible photo? The fear of missing out is all linking into sleep. And I know I've learned as an adult, I can't go to bed and scroll for 30 minutes, because whether it's football, and I get anxious about whether my team are going to make it to the Champions League, or whether I've seen something that's excited me about going to school the next day to try this out. I know how my brain works, and the minute it starts going fuzzy, I'm done. I won't sleep till 2 o'clock. So I think the chapter on sleep is really interesting, because it's a massive battle for young people.
Did your team make it to the Champions League?
We will find out on Sunday. We need to win and one of the team lose. So we're almost there. I'll send you an email. I'll let you know.
Okay. You send me an email and I'll send you an email about the 7 stages in the life of a teacher. Okay. Well, you know, you were talking about the phones and all. At home, we have a policy, well, apart from the adults, but with the kids, no phones in their bedrooms. So their phones stay in the living room and they get it in the morning after they wake up and before they go to school. Yeah. So tell me about Jenga. You had that.
Yeah, so you might have seen in the last 30, 40 minutes. I like an analogy, because I think that my brain works pictorially and visually. So when I was trying to make sense, I think everybody who writes a dissertation gets to a point where they've read and seen and thought so much, you just go, how do I simplify this? How do I just put this down in a way that makes me make sense? It's not to patronize the reader, but the only way I could think of why well-being, like your earlier question, became such a focus after COVID was, I suppose, the loss of a structure. So when I talk about well-being, I talk about, well, when me and my family play well-being, it's great to play, but then when it's gone, it's toppled over. You know, it's going to take 5 minutes to rebuild, and nobody wants to do it. So Dad ends up doing it, and that's okay, because I'll very carefully build it. And you can't build a good Jenga town unless those first 3 blocks are in place. So if my kids do it and they're rushing the last bit because they want to play, it's already on really shaky foundations. So this came to my mind when I was thinking, well, hang on. I'm at this stage of my dissertation where I need to be making some conclusions and recommendations. What is it that I'm saying? When schools have rushed ahead and they've tried to add in, whether it's platforms, accreditations, whether it's off-the-shelf curricula, if the bottom few rows of the bricks aren't in place, which are relationships, staff well-being, and the school culture, it's pointless. It's window dressing.
It'll fall over. It'll fall apart.
It'll fall over. if you don't have those 3 things in place, don't rush ahead and do all the fancy bits. Don't host that wellbeing conference if actually the wellbeing conference, your staff have been made to go, they're not happy, they've been here since 6 o'clock, and this wellbeing conference is the thing that's going to topple them over. The irony is not lost on me that we do those things, and I've made those mistakes as well, by the way. I'm certainly not perfect. I am someone who, like I said about sleep, if I see something that I think is going to work, I'm so desperate for it to work, I want it done tomorrow. And that can often also cause a Jenga tower to topple over. So that was my way of kind of bringing my research to something visual and kind of easy to see how those things might just tip the balance. So really, and I think a lot of dissertations do this, right? You hear studies that have spent millions and millions of pounds on, and the findings are, eating too much cheese is bad for you. Well, is that it? You spent 10 years researching that. And I do feel a little bit fraudulent in that respect by going, well, I did a master's for 4 years. And what I'm here to tell you is everything you thought that you knew was true is true. You've got to get the basics right before you go on. But it's a bit more complex than that. But that's the summary. Okay,
cool. That was a good one. I loved the pictures as well. I mean, the image, it just made it, really, really clear. I love a good diagram picture thing. Ill-being, you had under I, ill-being as opposed to well-being. Why ill-being?
I debated that one the most. That was the one I was least confident in, because it's not a thing that nobody, we have safeguarding on our pastoral agendas, and there's books about nobody talks about well-being. To be honest, I don't know if it is a thing, but the point I'm trying to make in the chapter is well-being gets a bad press in a lot of areas. And actually, in some conferences that I speak at, I talk about well-being almost becoming a dirty word, because it's almost like some teachers, particularly if they've heard me speak 3 or 4 times, will roll their eyes and go, oh, it's him again going on about well-being. We get it. COVID, well-being, let's all, look after kids. But the ill-being takes a bit of a different slant, because I'm not necessarily just thinking about emotional well-being. I'm thinking about how difficult is it in our job. And I teach senior school kids. My wife's a nursery nurse teacher. Now, she deals with snotty-nosed kids and kids falling over and seeing different bumps and bruises on kids all the time. Whereas when I see it in a senior school, quite often you send them to the nurse, and it's easier for older children, the children I work with, to mask signs of emotional ill-being by masking physical manifestations of them not being well. And I think I gave a couple of examples in that chapter where, teachers, and I don't want to be dramatic about it, potentially save lives by going, oh, you've hurt your wrist. Yeah, I did it playing football. And then next week, is that wrist done yet? Yeah, well, it's not, because I'm not allowed on my bike anymore. And that teacher's gone, hang on, football last week, cycling this week, there's something's not matched. And it's been, found out that actually that kid's been hit around at home. Now, again, maybe because of my background with these foster kids and always being conscious and being a father myself of, if my child's physically hurt, I can see that. And hopefully there is just a logical explanation to it. As teachers, I hope nobody would ever want to take the risk of missing a sign and not necessarily raising a flag about that, even if that just means passing it on to the safeguarding lead or the nurse for further investigation, because we do worry about upsetting parents. And, if you get a call and the insinuation is your child's got lots of bruises, what's going on? There's a right way to do that. I mean, if I took that call about, my son who's 14, plays football and rides a bike, I'd be really grateful. I'd go, thank you, appreciate that. But we can explain those things. I think, in Casey and in light of Every Child Matters and all the horror stories we've heard, Victoria Columbier and Baby P, I think teachers, we're under a lot of pressure at the moment to get everything right. Parents have a lot of power, but I think the chapter was relevant because let's not forget, over everything else, what our primary job is, and that's keeping children safe. I'd much rather,
care.
Duty of care, and let's make sure that always stays the priority, and let's not Let's not worry about upsetting people by doing that. Let's make sure that's a priority.
Yeah. I think what you just said there about upsetting people, I think there are people who may, think, oh, the school has overreacted or the teacher has overreacted. I think it happened with somebody I knew, and the person got really angry when the teachers noticed something, and they spoke then with the parents directly. So it didn't go up further on the chain, but then those parents then spoke to me. And they were a bit miffed, and they thought, oh, well, I think the school's overreacting. I mean, it can go both ways, right? It can be the school overreacting. Yeah. And I just tried to explain. I tried to explain to the family. I said, well, they do have a duty of care. And, if it had been somebody else's child and that child really needed help, I think you'd be grateful.
I think so. I think, we'll make the headlines where, in those awful examples I just gave you, where social services and teachers miss the signs, but on a daily basis, without it being headline news, because we do things the other way as well. We stop children getting hurt. We keep children safe. We alert social services. That's every day. And I think, a lot of people perhaps who aren't teachers don't understand that the job is more than just passing on skills and knowledge. When we are social workers, we're counsellors, we're mothers and fathers to some of these kids who don't have, other people to speak to. And whilst, I don't mind my friends sort of joking around when it comes to summer holidays and, oh, you're off for 6 weeks and you got 3 weeks at Christmas. I think the job is more demanding than I ever thought it would be, because I always wanted to be a teacher, away from being 9, 10. And it was always my backup plan when the acting and the other bits and pieces didn't work. And I'm in it now, and I don't regret it for a second, but it's hard. So I think, it's almost an imbalance of making the headlines when something's missed, and there's never an excuse for something to be missed. But let's not forget, we raise the alarm thousands of times a day around the world.
Yeah. And I mean, these kids, they'll remember you. They'll remember the people who were there for them, and the people who are there for them, you've got that in why for you, me. Yeah. Tell us about you.
Yeah, I think where I got to with you, I mean, it's such a personal profession. I mean, the amount of times I've come home and shed tears, the amount of times I've lost Liam, and I'm no hero. This is all of us who do this job, and particularly people in my line of work and the fantastic little team I have around me in my office at my school, the WhatsApps that ping in between me and my head teacher at midnight or whatever it may be. I think we forget, that we can't be that person. We can't be the best we can be unless we look after ourselves, unless we put ourselves into it as well. You kind of acknowledged it earlier with the banter. Children and young people, they don't care how much you know about the subject. And, you could perhaps get away with teaching with the bare minimum. And if you had relationships and kids loved you, they would lap everything up that you said or spoke. I think in John Catt's research as well, I think Catt's shows that actually anyone can make a difference just by being in the room. You don't even, you don't need a master's, you don't need a PhD in the finer points of English literature. If you've got a passion and you can connect with kids, whatever you've got will get you by, and those kids will make progress. But I think we've got to look after teachers, at a time where retention rates are falling, the pressures are increasing because parents know their rights now. Students, young people know their rights, rightly so. You can't get away with some of the things that happened at my school when I was 13, 14, being called an idiot, me being picked on for being small by teachers, not just students. Kids know their rights now. So rightly so, there is an increased focus on what it is we're saying, what it is we're doing. But that comes at a cost, because that it's added pressure to everything else that's happening. So I think the chapter about you was really a reminder that we need people to stay in this job. I know certainly there's a drain at the top end where we're looking for head teachers, because so many people leave. The amount, it's like all those sea turtles, there's millions of them that flap into the water, but so many of them get gobbled up that the chances of making it to an adult are, 1,000,000 to 1. And we're going to get to that stage with school leaders if we don't protect staff and ensure that staff well-being is really a focus.
Yeah, I was going to say, you know, that for teachers to be, it is a caring profession. Like I said, I was doing this little bit of research, and teaching is a caring profession, but like any other caring profession, it takes its toll on the carer, and we have to take care of that. Let's have a look at section 2. There were 2 things that were really, really interesting for me, and we're going to have to do that really briefly, but just as a reminder to our audience, this show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Publishing. No, John Catt Educational, even publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development with John Catt books. Use the code, see it here on the screen. It's JCTTR2425 for 20% off today. And Jamie, tell us please about the enrichment roadmap. I find that really fascinating.
Yeah, so I've been involved in the design of we call it enrichment here. I think PSHE or RSE in different contexts, but ultimately that section of education that doesn't deal with the academics. It deals with, you know, the social, the cultural, the moral, the spiritual development of young people. And I think it's always been the poor relation in a school. From my own, remembering my own education in a senior school, and the embarrassed PE teacher who was forced to deliver sex education and chucking paper balls from behind a screen at him. And it was almost like, well, let's just dump that somewhere. Previously in the 80s and the 90s, it was, well, we've got to do it, but no one's really trained. Nobody got into teaching to do that. And I think where I was at a crossroads when I didn't know whether I wanted to be a social worker or a teacher, it's perfect. It brings a cross section of the things that I find really interesting. I love my subjects that I teach, English and media studies, but I'm really, I feel we can empower teachers to actually raise better human beings at a time when the world needs them. But I don't think it's been ever more critical to, one, be a good parent, but two, raise children in this global village we're in now to be role models for the world. And I think the idea of an enrichment roadmap, instead of blundering through like I've seen some schools kind of, well, the year 8, let's do something on bullying. Well, year 9's got to be about drugs and vaping. To have something mapped out where you can say to parents, this is how we're going to help you, raise your child. You're going to do the majority of the work, but in school, we're going to take them, and, the roadmap spirals round. We're going to take them on this journey to make sure all of these points are covered at age-appropriate times in their development. So somebody somewhere is having those conversations. And the way we've designed that is that at the right junctures, appropriate people are delivering that material. So it's not the embarrassed geography teacher who's been forced to deliver sex ed talks. We've got school counsellors, we've got people trained. So we've really tried to roadmap that out so we can show to staff and students, we have a plan. We know where we want you to be, whether you leave us in year 8 or year 13. This is the kind of person we're trying to raise. So I think it's an important document to have for all schools. Yeah,
I love it. I love the concept. I really love the concept and what you're saying with, the age appropriacy and having that roadmap. And I think it shows that, a lot of thought has gone into it in, by the school, where they're not just thinking about, the curriculum, that content knowledge that the students should be acquiring, right? But also their personal development, how we can, raise or, I'll just use the word raise good world citizens, nothing less. Language charter. Oh, we are excellent with our timing here. Language charter. So I love that.
The language charter, again, was really interesting. I think looking at this from an English teacher point of view, the fact that now young people communicate in text more so than ever before, I think the fact that they can replay or revisit messages means that the power of words to them is so important. if I have a fallout with my son tonight and we're just speaking and words are exchanged, you might remember 2 or 3 things. But if we have an argument like kids do on a text, and it's a big long paragraph, as I understand the kids call them, they can go over that. They analyze every word. And I know, because my daughter will come to me and go, what do you think they meant when they said this? What about that?
Yeah.
And so the importance of language is not just about the verbal. It's about understanding that the power and the impact of words, I think, has taken on greater significance since social media. And what we saw in schools I've worked at previously without a language charter is this very simple get out clause. It comes back to something you said as well about banter, and it was a joke. And it's one of the reasons I didn't want to use the word banter, because I hear that all the time from kids who have caused a lot of damage and then hide behind banter. Now, there is a place for it. I'm a big fan of it. I employ it in my classrooms, and I think it's one of the reasons. Hopefully, my students come out of my lesson going, "Oh, I enjoyed that, because we did have a bit of banter." But I'm an adult, right? I know the boundaries, and students don't. So what that language charter does is makes it really clear, rather than just a line in the behaviour policy about we don't tolerate unacceptable language. This delineates what we mean explicitly, even down to emojis. Emojis are more powerful than us adults realise. And you send the wrong emoji. We had a laugh in our family group the other week because all the different coloured hearts mean something. And my mother-in-law uses the purple one, which apparently means something a little bit more inappropriate than what she realised. So all of these codes are there. So the language chart is important for that.
Yeah, I think that's so important. Like you said, nowadays, especially more so with young people, I think they've forgotten how to talk to each other. So much of their communication is online, and then on WhatsApp or whatever other messaging service they use, it stays there, like you say, it stays there, so they keep going back to it. Or the other scenario being, you write something, you send it, you can't take it back. Well, you can, because on WhatsApp you have that delete function. But if you're really unfortunate and the other person's read it already, it's still yeah. Anyway, that said, what, Jamie, is your last message to teachers, other than my last message is get the book, read it? What's your last message?
I think when I got to the last chapter, I'm quite an emotional person, and I got a little bit emotional writing that last chapter for a couple of reasons. One, it had taken a long time. I was glad to be able to hand it over to Roy. But secondly, I thought there's hopefully somebody sat there in the world who's got to this point. And my last message, I suppose I'll echo here. If you got to the end of this podcast, or you get to the end of the book, it already shows that this matters to you so much. The teachers who, rather than playing Farmville or Candy Crush or going onto Netflix, are doing things like this, listening to these conversations, reading books like that, because it's so important for them to get things right. I just think I encourage you, even when you have a bad day, and we all have them, even when you think, this might not be the job for you, there's a kid somewhere who every day thinks about you. There's a kid who's 27 now who perhaps wouldn't be there if it wasn't for you, because you did something, and it might be something you can't even remember. A little gesture, you said something, you checked in on them, you made that phone call home that stopped mum and dad doing that thing that was going to tip them over the edge. I think this job is an absolute privilege, with all the pressures that come with it. I think the position we're in, that when we retire at 65, 70, whatever it might be now, that there will be an impact. There will be something that we did that changed the course, whether it's put someone on a different career path, might not even be social or emotional, but you might have empowered that person to seek that career over that one. I think just hang on to that, because this is the best job in the world, to go in to an environment where you might be tired, you might be fed up, and within an hour, those kids can just light you back up again and reignite that passion, remind you, like the girl who brought me a little gift in today for the end of term. It was just a hat, and it just said best teacher, and I put it on my shelf, and it just meant the world, because you deal with a lot, and there are people who are grateful, and it does matter, and you are really, really important.
You've just put the weight of the world on our shoulders there, Jamie. On that note, our dear listeners and viewers, have you subscribed to our weekly newsletter yet? It's called Soundbites and Insights, and it's delivered to 10,000 educators a week. It contains a curated selection of 4 standout TTR shows from the week, exclusive discounts, and exclusive offers from our sponsors. Sign up on our website at ttradio.org/newsletter. I have been talking with Jamie O Dowd, author of A-Z of Student Wellbeing. This show has been brought to you in partnership with John Catt, Educational Publishers. Thank you for listening. Thank you so much, Jamie, for your insights. It has been a pleasure talking to you.
Outstanding, a world-class vision, a world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.